What if you traveled to Paris thinking you'd just write a book and ended up living a love story no book ever dared to write? Forget everything you think you know about love, because this story proves cliches can be dead wrong, and that a man who smells like warm bread might just become your most dangerous temptation. She ran away to start over. He showed up with a pie, a dangerous accent, and a silent promise to become her next plot twist. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit that bell icon, drop a like, and help this story reach more hearts just like yours. Paris smelled like warm bread, disdain, and dangerous possibilities. A bittersweet perfume of history, someone else's cigarette smoke and flowers no one asked for. The kind of scent that made your knees tremble and your heart, if not properly guarded, start believing in happy endings. On the sidewalk of Rue de l'Espoir, a name far too pretentious for a street that barely saw direct sunlight, she stepped out of the taxi with the unbalanced elegance of someone carrying more emotional baggage than actual luggage. Scarf askew around her neck, dark circles beneath oversized sunglasses, a run in her left knee high, and a look that swore she wasn't running away, just changing the scenery. Alice Bernard, 32 years old, ghostwriter of other people's love stories, recently wrecked heart and sarcasm sharp as a kitchen knife. Her plan was simple: spend 6 months in Paris, write her own book, and pretend 5 years of betrayal hadn't touched her at Diol. Spoiler alert, it had, but she'd rather die than say it out loud. The apartment was small, old, filled with creaks and furniture that looked like it had been inherited from a chain-smoking eccentric aunt. There were linen curtains that danced with the breeze, the scent of aged wood mingling with burnt coffee, and a partial view of the Eiffel Tower, if she stood on tiptoe and tilted her head at an absurdly specific angle. Romantic, she muttered with scorn, dropping her bags. With a sigh, I hate being a cliché, but please, Paris, surprise me. And Paris listened, because on the other side of a wall as thin as wax paper, someone was chopping onions with almost sensual precision, humming softly while something sizzled in hot butter. He, on the other hand, wasn't expecting to be heard, nor did he want to be. Mathieu Dumas, 35, renowned chef, owner of a small award-winning bistro in Le Marais, part-time food columnist, and full-time professional. Scoundrel. He had lived in that apartment forever, inherited from his maternal grandmother, a former ballerina who danced better drunk than sober. He loved living there, the balcony with its thirsty lavender pots, the collection of copper pans hanging above the stove like war medals, the perpetually unmade bed, and a fridge packed with more exotic ingredients than any respectable pantry had a right to contain. He had lovers, yes, but he never got attached. Allergic to promises. He preferred the lightness of bodies to the weight of emotion. Relationships are like soufflés, he used to say. Beautiful on the outside, but one wrong breath and the whole thing collapses. He'd laugh, deep, low, and that laugh alone caused unnecessary shivers in unsuspecting listeners. That morning, Mathieu was barefoot, wearing linen pants and a half-open shirt, sautéing garlic and onions in truffle butter with a chunk of baguette resting between his teeth. The aroma was intense, indecent, borderline pornographic, a sinful mix of golden garlic, white wine, and Sicilian lemon, the scent of temptation. And then he heard it, a stumble, a suitcase thudding against the wall, and a woman's voice from the other side, whispering something in English, with an American accent and the tone of a woman who's had her heart broken and isn't interested in being gentle anymore. His eyebrow arched. Interesting, he said to himself, flashing that crooked smile, of a man who's already decided to provoke. Alice, however, had no idea her wall was more transparent than her best friend's ex. As she unpacked books she'd never finished, she was hit by the scent of butter, lemon, and something that could only be described as sin in vapor form. Her eyes closed instinctively. She inhaled. She almost moaned. Seriously? The neighbor cooks with pheromones? She didn't want to like it. She wanted to hate it. But the man on the other side, whoever, he was cooked like he was seducing the air itself, as if each ingredient were foreplay, as if each pan whispered things his mouth didn't dare say. It was borderline obscene. And then he started singing, softly, casually, as if singing to the skillet, not the world. The voice was deep, raspy, almost immoral. French, low and hoarse, the kind of tone that slid over your skin like an illicit touch. She dropped the book on the floor. "You've got to be kidding me." She marched to the wall, pressed her forehead to the aging plaster. "This is it? You're going to seduce me with wine, butter, and a baritone on day one?" The wall didn't reply, but the scent remained, and so did the voice, like a dangerous recipe written in jazz notes and black pepper. She laughed, a short, nervous laugh. She didn't know it yet, but that was the scent of disaster announcing its arrival. Mathieu smiled too. He knew when he was being noticed, and he loved a skeptical audience. Skeptical women were always the first to fall. 2 days went by. Alice wandered the neighborhood in her tilted beret and artistic disdain. She mentally jotted down subway conversations, watched couples kissing on street corners with the expression of someone who found it all unbearably cheesy, and secretly envied every second of it. Upon returning, she found an anonymous note slid under her door. "Welcome to Rue de l'Espoir. A word of advice. Keep your windows closed during storms. Some things fly, others escape." No signature, no context. Alice bit her lip. Was that a threat? A poem? An invitation to a threesome? She laughed again, longer this time. Paris was definitely outdoing itself. Upstairs, 2 nosy neighbors were already betting that the new tenant would fall quickly into Dumas' claws. "But she looks like a tough one," said one. "Even better," answered the other. Mathieu kept living as if life were a French film. Smoke, wine, skin, and poetic silences. But he heard her when she passed by. He recognized the sound of her heels, the hesitant creak of her door. He knew she wrote at night and spoke to herself in English, with a melancholic accent. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he wouldn't resist provoking her. That night, she left the window slightly ajar, unintentionally, or maybe only half unintentionally. The scent of creamy risotto with fresh parmesan crept in slowly, like a charming thief. Alice, wineglass in hand, pretended not to inhale, pretended she wasn't starving. On the other side, Mathieu smiled at the wall and zested the lemon with more intention, as if to say, "I know you're there, and you know that I know." The tension was invisible, but it stretched like a rubber band. One wrong move and someone was going to get hurt, and maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what they wanted. They didn't know each other yet, but their silences were already in love. Alice jotted into her notebook, Chapter 1, Woman finds peace in Paris. Chapter 2, Obnoxious neighbor threatens all peace with scent of risotto and a sinfully tuned voice. Chapter 3, She resists. Chapter 4, She fails gloriously. She crossed out 3, then crossed out 4, then closed the notebook. Paris didn't follow a script. Across the city, fate laughed. It knew exactly what it was doing. And the next day, when she goes to the bakery, she'll stumble. Not on a baguette, but on a pair of eyes that will unravel everything. All she wanted was silence. He was the most irresistible noise in Paris. But what she didn't know yet is that very morning, he'd drop something in the hallway, and she'd pick it up. And the moment she touched that paper, everything would change. Alice was not exactly a morning person. She could only tolerate mornings if there was very strong coffee and absolutely no human contact during the first 2 hours of consciousness. But the coffee in the apartment was weaker than her faith in love, and the frozen croissants she'd bought at the neighborhood market tasted like they'd been baked in a past century. So, armed with her largest sweater, a messy bun, and the most unnecessary pair of sunglasses in the Parisian winter, she headed downstairs to get fresh bread, and maybe a reason not to curse her entire life before 9 a.m. The hallway was still cold and smelled of broken heating and old wood. Alice exhaled sharply, pulling the sweater up to her nose, and muttered in English like someone blowing sarcasm into the air. Of course, because Paris wouldn't be Paris without a minor thermal breakdown at dawn. The moment her feet hit the ground floor, something fell from above. A soft thud of leather hitting stone, followed by the rough slide of paper skimming across cold tile. She didn't even see where it came from. She just bent down out of reflex and picked it up. It was a notebook, small with worn leather edges, hand-stitched. Alice flipped it between her fingers, noticing notes written in faded blue ink, recipes, ingredients, and something that looked like a dedication on the back cover. For the man who knows flavor always comes before words. She arched an eyebrow, and then she saw him. Mathieu was descending the last few steps of the staircase with a linen apron slung over one shoulder, jacket half open, and the effortless charm of someone who looked good just by existing. Messy hair, scruffy beard, and a sprig of rosemary poking out of his tote like an unintentional bouquet. Alice stared at him a second too long, then muttered in English, "Of course. Obviously. Gorgeous man, perfect moment, classic Parisian disaster." He smiled, slowly, that kind of smile that started in the corner of the mouth and landed directly on the weakness of whoever was watching. She held out the notebook. He took it with just his fingertips, their skin brushed, warm against chilled, tension against uncertainty. He spoke in French, low and polite. "Merci. Almost lost my brain this morning." Alice smiled back, replying in French, trying to sound casual. "It seems important." "It is. Some recipes don't survive being forgotten." She laughed, slightly surprised at his ease, and also at the fact that he seemed even more compelling in person than when seducing the air with indecent aromas through the wall. "You're a cook?" "Chef. I run a small bistro in Le Marais." "That explains the smell." She hesitated. "Not that I was smelling you. I hope you were. I'd take it as a compliment." He winked, barely noticeable. She froze, tried to come up with something witty, but her mind was too busy processing the scent of fresh rosemary and butter escaping his bag. She changed the subject with the grace of a well-disguised stumble. "Last night, were you listening to music? Jazz?" He answered in French, still wearing that innocent look. "Maybe. I usually play some while I cook." "Why?" "Because jazz travels through walls like an intimate invasion. But a good one." "So, that wasn't a complaint." "Not yet. But if you start playing opera, it might turn into one." He laughed, a short, deep sound that felt like a promise without a name. She pretended she had somewhere to be. He didn't stop her, but just as she turned to go upstairs with her sad croissants, he said, "Oh, and thank you for saving my morning. That notebook's worth more than my life insurance. Glad I could be of service." She hesitated a beat, then added still in French, "If any of those recipes are good enough, I'll accept a slice as a reward." She thought it was a joke. He thought it was a challenge, and Paris smiled at them both. Later that day, while she typed disconnected sentences into her laptop and tried not to think about French neighbors with poetic notebooks and impure smiles, Alice heard a noise in the hallway. Voices, then some pipe clanging. Something definitely broke. Minutes later, a message from the building group, translated by the landlady with questionable enthusiasm, hit everyone's inbox. "Dear residents, the third-floor heater has malfunctioned and will be temporarily shut off. The ground-floor laundry room is available for use. Please coordinate times to avoid overcrowding. Sincerely, Madame Rousseau." Alice grumbled in English. Of course. Because nothing screams new life in Paris like sharing a washing machine with a sensual stranger who smells like rosemary. 30 minutes later, Alice came downstairs with a basket of dirty clothes, a worn-out sweatshirt, and the hope of not running into anyone. But fate, as always, had more poetic, and frankly more wicked, plans. As soon as she turned the laundry room corner, she saw him again, this time without a jacket, just a shirt with sleeves rolled up, a linen towel tossed over his shoulder, and a cookbook open across a makeshift counter. While the machine spun, Mathieu leaned against the narrow surface, holding a crumpled piece of wax paper. An irresistible smell drifted out. Mushrooms, cheese, and sizzling butter. He'd already taken a few bites, but most of it was still there. When he saw her walk in, he lifted the bundle like someone offering a truce in the middle of a war. "Want some?" he asked casually. Alice raised an eyebrow. "You bring food to the laundry room?" "I bring food everywhere," he shrugged, "and it would be selfish not to share." Before she could politely decline, he held out the package. She hesitated a second, but the smell won. She took it with both hands, tore the paper wider, and bit down. The first taste hit her like an electric shock. Crispy crust, creamy filling, seasoning just right. She couldn't help it. A moan escaped, small but loud enough to echo in the quiet laundry room. Mathieu tilted his head slightly, as if savoring not the food, but her reaction. Better than eating alone, isn't it? Alice swallowed quickly, trying to reclaim some dignity. You really do cook like you have bad intentions. He smiled slowly. And you eat like you're keeping secrets. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, bit again, faster this time. Then, under her breath, she muttered in English, "If I'm not careful, this man's going to ruin my diet, my sanity, and probably my bed." Mathieu stayed silent, leaning against the counter, just watching. What Alice didn't know was that Mathieu was the son of American immigrants, and fluent in English. He had understood every single word. But Alice, confident in her assumed privacy, believed her muttering had gone unnoticed. She handed back the rest of the piece, her mouth still warm with flavor, and said, "Thanks for sharing. No need to thank me. I like it when food makes someone forget everything for a few seconds." Alice held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned to the machine, pretending to be interested in the blinking red countdown. "Well, I'll wait for the wash to finish. Then I won't get in the way." He took back the wax paper, had one last bite, and walked slowly toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced over his shoulder. "Next time, I'll bring wine too." Alice's stomach turned, and it wasn't because of the pastry. Later, Alice tried to write. She really did. She sat in front of her laptop, opened the file titled "Things That Don't Hurt Anymore," took a sip of coffee, and managed exactly 7 words before deleting them all. The pie scene was still fresh, literally. She could still taste the mushrooms, the nutmeg, the buttery crust. And him. That damned man had poured his soul into a recipe. And worse, he served it the way someone offers a kiss. She sighed, set the mug aside, paced across the room, then flopped on the couch with an exasperated breath. She picked up her phone, opened the front camera, and murmured, "It's official. I'm being emotionally seduced by carbs." In French. The phone didn't reply. Neither did the wall. But on the other side, a perfectly bilingual Frenchman lifted his eyes from a cookbook and smiled like someone who had just won a secret round in a game no one else knew was being played. Mathieu was in no hurry. He knew how to savor time. And she was a dish he wanted to taste slowly. The next morning, Paris woke up to a gray sky and the smell of coming rain. Alice put on her beret, ignored the laziness, and left the apartment with a grocery list she pretended was important. Truth was, she just needed to keep her mind busy, or escape it. She turned the corner, walked past the local market, and unintentionally passed the window of Mathieu's bistro. There he was, inside the kitchen, completely focused, crisp white, chef's coat, sleeves rolled to the forearms. He held a delicate pair of tongs like a surgical tool, and carefully placed micro basil leaves on a plate that looked more like a work of art than food. Alice stopped. Just for a second. Just to look. She whispered, "The man cooks like he paints, like someone who was supposed to be fictional," then kept walking, as if she hadn't said a word. Mathieu behind the glass didn't see her, but he felt it, like the air had changed. Temperature. A slight chill down the spine. The kind of sensation that only happens when the most unpredictable piece on the board makes its first move. Later, she returned with bags full of ingredients she had no idea how to use. She reached the building's entrance, juggling the weight and cursing the brie that kept slipping from the strap. The elevator doors were open, and of course, Mathieu was inside. She hesitated. She could wait for the next one, but her dignity was hanging by a thread and a red onion. She stepped in. They looked at each other, in silence. The elevator began to rise. He said, "Brie is treacherous, especially when it slides through the street and threatens to destroy your reputation. In my opinion, your reputation remains intact." He glanced sideways at her with a quick smile, though I can't say the same for the brie. She bit her lip, pretended not to smile, pretended not to notice when he adjusted the strap of her bag to stop the cheese from falling. "Do you cook every day?" she asked. "I do. It's how I exist in the world." "And you? Do you write every day?" "I try. It's how I keep from giving up on the world." "Is it working?" "Some mornings, yes. Others, only with pie." They laughed together and the sound lingered in the elevator. like a scent too good to fade quickly. When the doors opened on their floor, Mathieu stepped out first, but held the door for her with a subtle nod. Effortless chivalry. The kind that doesn't beg for attention. The kind that sends shivers down your skin without permission. Later in the afternoon, Alice stepped out of the elevator carrying a pile of clean laundry when she suddenly stopped in front of her door. There, hanging from the doorknob, was a small beige cloth bag tied with a simple twine bow. Inside, a plate covered in a linen cloth. Attached to the handle, a handwritten note. To the lady who appreciates a good pie. A slice of heaven with mushrooms and irony. Alice glanced around, suspicious, as if the whole hallway were conspiring against her sanity. Nothing, only silence, and the unmistakable scent of still warm butter drifting from the bag. She bit down on a smile, lowered the pile of laundry to the floor, carefully took the bag, and stepped inside, leaving the door slightly ajar, feeling like she was accepting something far bigger than food. She placed the bundle on the table, took a deep breath, pulled the bow loose, and lifted the cloth. It was a perfect slice of quiche, golden, aromatic, warm. She couldn't resist. She took the first bite, and the flavor burst in her mouth like each ingredient had been chosen to strip her soul bare. A soft moan slipped out, without permission. And then, as if it were a scene from a movie she swore she hated, Mathieu appeared at the door, casual, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, that same dangerously serene smile. "So, did you enjoy my favorite sin?" His voice came low, slow, almost an invitation. Alice wiped her mouth, trying to gather her dignity, but her heartbeat had already climbed to her throat. "I couldn't resist. You cook like you understand secrets." "Maybe I do." He tilted his head, eyes locked on hers. "Especially the ones you don't intend to tell." She arched a brow, teasing. "What else do you understand, besides recipes and provocation?" "Bodies," he said, his smile spreading slowly, "and silences." She felt her stomach twist but didn't look away. "Are you the type who listens to what's not being said?" "Always." He stepped inside. "That's where the most delicious things live." She took a deep breath, holding his gaze. "Then I imagine my silences have been loud?" He smiled like someone savoring the game. "Deafening. Shame I can't say the same about yours. I'm French." He stepped closer, his voice even lower. "My silence is a declaration of desire just waiting to be discovered." Alice didn't know whether to laugh, curse, or throw the quiche at him. What she did was laugh, nervously, while her blood simmered beneath her skin. "You're a walking cliché. A cliché who cooks better than he kisses?" He tilted his chin, daring. She froze for a moment, without a clever reply, then stood up, handed back the plate, and said with rehearsed coolness, "Thank you." The pie was delicious, and added this time, in English, thinking he wouldn't understand, "And the chef is a dimpled danger." She ignored him, pretending not to see the smile threatening to bloom on his lips, and gently pushed him out the door. She closed it too quickly, as if the air had become unbearably heavy. Mathieu stood outside, still holding the plate. A slow smile spread across his mouth, and in perfect English, he murmured to himself, "And the writer is a poem begging to be read out loud." Inside the apartment, Alice paced, restless. It wasn't the pie, it wasn't the smile, it was that look, that way he listened, as if saying, "I see you, even when you think you're hiding." She collapsed into the armchair, grabbed her notebook, and wrote furiously, as if she could bleed the tension out with ink. "He's dangerous. The kind of man who serves you warm food, then looks at you like he's already seen you naked. Run, Alice, but take the plate." Later, Mathieu sat on his balcony, with a glass of wine and a blanket tossed over his shoulders. He watched her window. The curtain was slightly open, letting out the soft glow of a lamp. He rested his head against the back of the chair, and in flawless English, the kind she didn't know he spoke, he murmured gently, "This is only the first chapter, darling, and I cook better in the ones that follow." The morning sun filtered through the bistro curtains without asking permission. The light slid across the dark. Wooden tables reflected off misaligned glasses and landed on the gleaming steel of the kitchen. Inside, Mathieu moved with the disciplined grace of a dancer and the carefree insolence of a bohemian. White shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows, apron stained with butter and wine, a sharp knife gliding over fresh mushrooms. With each precise cut, he released an earthy scent that rose like a promise, mixed with the heat of the oven and the crackle of olive oil in the skillet. That's how he worked, with an almost sensual intensity, as if cooking were just another way to seduce. "Chef?" called Katerina, the young apprentice, balancing a tray of clean dishes. "You're smiling to yourself again. Dangerous." He looked up slowly, that lazy smile still on his face. "And why would that be dangerous, Katerina?" "Because when you smile like that, it always means someone's about to fall in love." Mathieu let out a low laugh, dropping the sliced mushrooms into the creamy sauce. "If only it were that simple, ma chère. Sometimes a smile is just a memory." Katerina tilted her head, curious. A memory of what? He fell silent for a second. In his mind, the scene from the night before returned with indecent clarity. Alice, her lips curling into that involuntary moan when she bit into the pie, the way she muttered in English, thinking no one understood. "And the chef is a dimpled danger." Mathieu stirred the sauce more forcefully, as if trying to dissolve the thought along with it. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Katerina, sharp as she was, arched a brow. "So it's someone, not something." He didn't answer, just threw in a pinch of nutmeg, and the aroma spread like a poorly kept secret. In the bistro dining room, tables were already filling. Madame Beaumont, an elegant widow with silver hair, took her usual spot by the window, just like every Wednesday. The waiter brought her glass of Chardonnay without her, needing to ask. "Mathieu!" she called, snapping her fingers like he was both the chef and her honorary grandson. "Come here." He wiped his hands on his apron and approached. "Madame Beaumont, always a pleasure." She looked him up and down with sharp eyes. "You've been different, boy. Your dishes are spicier." He smiled. "Maybe it's just the pepper. Mon cher, don't play me. I was married to a cheating diplomat for 30 years. I recognize the look of a man distracted by a woman." Mathieu raised an eyebrow, theatrical. "Or maybe it's just the look of a man who didn't sleep much." She laughed, amused, waving her hand like brushing away smoke. "Sleep less, but cook like this every day. Paris thanks you." He returned to the kitchen with a smile that was almost involuntary. At night, the bistro slept, but Mathieu didn't. By the Seine, sitting with a bottle of cheap wine that felt more refined under the streetlights, he was joined by his 4 usual accomplices, the bohemian core that made Paris feel less like a city and more like the stage of an improbable play. Henri, the poet, wore an oversized scarf even without cold. He spent hours reciting verses he never finished. Next to him, Camille, the painter, had hands stained with paint even when she swore she wasn't painting anything. Laurent, the saxophonist, cradled his instrument like an incurable addiction. And Juliette, a street actress, smoked slowly, turning each drag into a performative gesture. "So," began Henri, leaning over the wine bottle like revealing a secret, "they say our chef has been smiling too much in the kitchen. Is that a crime in Paris?" Mathieu shot back, pouring himself into a plastic cup with fake innocence. Camille smirked. "Not a crime, a symptom." "A symptom of what?" "A new neighbor." She tilted her chin toward him, eyes gleaming. "Am I right?" Juliette burst out laughing, smoke escaping in swirling arabesques. "American neighbor, I bet. They always move to Paris thinking they'll find love in cafes and end up finding Mathieu Dumas." Laurent blew a cheeky chord from his sax, a soundtrack to the provocation. "Exactly," he said. "I've already composed the theme. The chef's neighbor." Henri clapped, Camille whistled, Juliette tilted her head with theatrical flair. "Confess, Mathieu." Juliette locked eyes with stage-worthy intensity. "What's her name?" He swirled the wine in his cup. Thoughtful. He could have said nothing, could have laughed it off, but the truth slipped out before he could catch it. "Alice." The friends exchanged knowing glances, like they'd just won the night. "Alice," Henri repeated, already turning the name into a verse. Alice, the temptation in Mathieu's kitchen. Camille threw her head back and laughed. "Sounds like the title of an erotic painting. Or a disaster in the making," added Juliette. Mathieu tried to protest. "She's just a neighbor." But no one believed it, not even him. Laurent played a slow, almost melancholic melody, dripping into the Seine like a confession. Mathieu stayed silent, and in that silence, her image returned, vivid. The sharp gaze, the irony on her lips, the way she seemed to laugh at the whole world and still wanted to be surprised by it. He looked at the river, as if Paris could hide secrets in its current. But the truth was, there were no secrets at all. It was happening. And against all his usual instincts, Mathieu Dumas didn't want to resist. Meanwhile, across the same city, Alice's heart was fighting a similar battle, though she'd swear with all the stubbornness in the world that it had nothing to do with French neighbors and their criminal dimples. The cursor blinked, blinks, 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 and nothing. Alice stared at the laptop screen like staring at a bad joke. The file, Things That Don't Hurt Anymore, had been open for 3 days, with half a dozen sentences that seemed written by a drunk version of herself. She pushed her glasses up to the top of her head, stretched her body on the couch, and let out a sigh like signing surrender. Paris, the city of lights, she muttered, sarcastic. But it feels like someone switched off the bulb in my inspiration. She got up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the fridge. Half a glass of wine, a tub of yogurt, 2 apples well past their prime, and, of course, the slice of quiche she hadn't had the courage to throw away. Just looking at it brought back Mathieu's smile, the way he leaned in the doorway like he owned the frame and the whole scene. She closed the fridge too fast, like slamming shut a memory. But the scent of butter was still in her head, insolent, persistent. Damn Frenchman, she muttered, convinced the world was safe enough for private confessions. She went back to the couch, opened her laptop again, and typed, Chapter 1. He stepped into her life the way you serve a hot dish in winter. Dangerous, irresistible, and capable of ruining any emotional diet. She smiled to herself, then deleted it all. Great. Now I'm turning my life into a culinary romance. Her phone buzzed. It was a video call from Susan, her younger sister, always electric, always with a cup of coffee in hand and an opinion on the tip of her tongue. Alice answered. Finally, Susan appeared on screen, wrapped in an oversized hoodie, hair in a chaotic bun. I was starting to think you'd been kidnapped by a French sommelier. Alice laughed, but it came out a little guilty. Not a sommelier, a chef. Susan's eyes widened like she'd just won the gossip lottery. Oh, my God. You've already got a Frenchman on your radar. He's not on my radar. It's circumstantial. He lives next door. Next door? Like wall to wall? Pretty much. Susan clapped her hands, way too excited. Of course, Paris never fails. You're going to finish that book because you're too busy living the plot. Alice rolled her eyes. Susan, I didn't come here for romance. I came here to write. And how's the writing going? Alice looked at the blinking cursor on the screen. Slow. Susan grinned wickedly. Translation, the Frenchman's a distraction. Alice leaned back on the couch, arms crossed. He cooks. They all cook in Paris. Not like this. Alice closed her eyes, almost tasting the quiche. Again. You don't get it. It was like each bite was a secret told only to me. Susan paused for a second, then burst out laughing. Oh my God, you moaned, didn't you? Alice opened her eyes, offended. I don't moan for food. Uh-huh. Okay. A noise. Involuntary. A noise? Susan covered her mouth, laughing nonstop. You moaned over carbs, Alice. Alice buried her face in a pillow. I hate you. You love me. And you're in love. I'm not in love. I'm distracted. Temporarily. By an irritatingly handsome Frenchman. Irritatingly handsome and a good cook. That's basically emotional porn. Alice couldn't help laughing. Susan, I'm serious. I can't let myself get this distracted. I have to finish the book. And maybe he's exactly what you need to write it. Alice hesitated, because in some way, Susan was right. Since meeting Mathieu, the words had started nudging her mind again. Not full sentences, but fragments. Images. Smells. Tiny beginnings. He stepped into her life the way you serve a hot dish in winter. Maybe letting the distraction exist wasn't the worst thing. Susan leaned closer to the screen, her eyes sparkling. Just promise me one thing. What? That you won't let Paris be just a backdrop. Make this city the plot. Alice bit her lip, thoughtful. I'll try. Good. Now show me this Frenchman on the next call. Goodbye, Susan. She hung up before her sister could extract more details. Sat, staring at the black screen of her phone, reflected in it. And of course, in the back of her mind, him. Always him. The lazy smile. The way he seemed to listen even to silence. And most of all, that dangerous feeling that if she wasn't careful, Paris wouldn't just be the backdrop of the book, it would be her story. Alice was convinced she could go an entire week without thinking about him. Convinced. The kind of self-deception that only works until the elevator door opens. All it took was the distant smell of freshly baked bread drifting through the building's hallway. And there she was, breathing deep like someone sniffing danger, trying to pretend her heart didn't give a lazy little leap in her chest. But that afternoon, the city seemed to conspire. The sun draped itself lazily over Paris, painting everything in an insolent gold, the kind that makes you want to be in a movie, or at least in a life that didn't feel so jammed. Alice stepped outside with her headphones in, trying to ignore the neighbors, the tourists, the sinking feeling that all of Paris was laughing at her. And then his voice, deep, perfectly modulated, cut through the music and settled directly into her spine. Alice. She stopped in the middle of the lobby, as if someone had invisibly pulled her waist. Slowly, she removed one earbud. Mathieu was leaning against the side wall, like he'd been waiting for her all along. But there was nothing forced about it. The casual way he held a canvas tote seemed far too natural. Too natural to be coincidence. "Are you busy?" he asked with that smile that felt more like a promise. Alice raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Always skeptical. "Busy is my relationship status, my mood, and usually my hair." "Why?" He ignored the sarcasm. Or better, fed on it like it was the finest wine in the cellar. "Because I thought about kidnapping you for a few hours." Alice choked. Literally. Coughed. "Kidnapping?" she repeated as if certain she'd misheard. "For a picnic," he clarified, lifting the canvas tote slightly. "Bread, cheese, wine. A dessert that might make you forgive me for existing." "And why would I need to forgive you for existing?" She shot back, arms crossed. "Because ever since you arrived, I haven't been able to think about anything but distractions. And cooking with distractions is a lethal hazard." Alice rolled her eyes, but her breath caught for half a second. His audacity was infuriating, infuriatingly effective. She adjusted the earbud on her shoulder, trying not to look nervous. "And what's the guarantee this isn't a French trap?" "There are no guarantees," he replied, annoyingly calm. "Just food, wine, and the sunset." Her gaze faltered. Sunset. He knew exactly where to press. "I have things to do," she lied without flinching. "Like not thinking about me, for example?" He shot back. Alice choked on her own laugh. Damn it, he was too fast. "You're unbearable." That's what they all say before the first sip of wine. Alice narrowed her eyes, trying to stay composed. But against her own will, she said, "If I go, it's only because I hate wasting food." "Of course." He nodded with that half-smile that said the opposite. "Then let's not waste any." The spot he picked was a quiet bend in the Seine, where the trees cast shade over a hidden patch of grass. The city pulsed in the distance, but here, there was only the sound of water and the occasional jingle of a passing bicycle. Mathieu spread out a linen blanket with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Alice sat down slowly, cautious, as if any movement could trigger a trap. He in turn opened the bag like revealing a magic trick. Still warm rustic bread, brie sliced generously, shiny grapes laid out like jewels, a bottle of white wine, sweating tiny droplets on the glass. And finally, a dessert that looked indecent just from the sight alone, raspberry tartelettes. Alice crossed her arms, trying not to drool. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Ridiculously delicious, maybe. You didn't have to do all this." "I never do just enough," he replied, pouring the wine. "It's a character flaw." She took the glass, unsure whether to drink it or throw it at him. "You think you're irresistible, don't you? I know how to cook. That makes me irresistible by definition." Alice took a quick sip, as if she could drown her response. But the wine only made her blood move faster. Mathieu tore the bread with his hands, offering her a piece. She took it, their fingers brushing by accident. He didn't pull back right away. He let the touch linger. Just a second longer. Just enough for Alice to feel the warmth rise through her veins. "So," he began casually, slicing a piece of brie, "what brought you to Paris?" "A plane." She bit into the bread aggressively. He laughed, a low, deep sound that seemed tailor-made to vibrate against her skin. "I like witty women." "Great. Then go find one. I'm looking at her right now." Alice looked away, pretending to be interested in the grapes. Damn, that man had a comeback for everything. "Are you always like this?" she asked. "Or is this just a show for unsuspecting tourists? Only when the tourist has eyes that turn every answer into a challenge." Alice froze for half a second, then recovered with sarcasm. "You're a walking metaphor. I prefer to think of myself as a multi-layered recipe. You have to taste every layer to understand the full flavor." She almost let a laugh escape, but held it in and bit the bread again, as if chewing were a form of resistance. The sun dipped lower, tinting everything in gold. The wine flowed, and Alice's walls slowly melted along with the light of day. Mathieu talked about his childhood in Parisian markets, about the scent of spices, his first recipes. She talked about books, about how certain stories need silence to be born. And with each reply, each pause, there was something unspoken floating in the air. "Do you realize how cliché this is?" Alice said suddenly. "Picnic in Paris, wine, cheese, the sun setting, and yet you don't seem bored." "I never said I was bored. You said it was a cliché, which is different. I hate clichés." "Then I'll work harder to make this one the exception." She looked up, met his gaze, and for a moment forgot to breathe. Alice cleared her throat, trying to break the tension. "Tell me, do you always use food as a seduction tool?" "It's not a tool. It's a prelude." "A prelude to what?" He stepped in slightly closer, voice low, almost a whisper. "Whatever comes after." Alice nearly let the glass slip from her hand. "You're impossible. And you're smiling." She turned her face away, trying to hide it. But it was true. She was smiling. The tartelettes were waiting. Mathieu picked one up, sliced it in half, and handed her a portion. Alice brought it to her mouth, and the tart raspberry burst across her tongue. "Careful," he said, watching her with eyes almost feline. "Raspberries stain." She licked the corner of her lips, absent-mindedly, and only realized he was staring when it was already too late. "What?" she asked, suspicious. "You just proved me." "Right. Right about what?" "That some things are only complete when someone moans across the table." Alice choked, coughing. You're indecent." "No, I'm honest." She bit into the tartelette again, maybe as an excuse not to respond, but the heat in her face gave her away. And Mathieu, patient, just watched, like someone who knows resistance comes with an expiration date. The sun was already spilling golden blades across the river when the breeze lifted the edge of the linen blanket, bringing a gentle chill, the kind the skin records as an excuse. Mathieu pulled a small pocket knife from his jacket, cut another piece of bread, spread brie with the tip of his finger, deliberately, like someone who knows some gestures say more than speeches, and offered it again. Alice hesitated, brushed her fingertips against his, and took it. The touch lingered 1 second longer than it should have. She felt the warmth rise up her neck and hated herself for it, or almost hated herself. Wine has that power. It loosens truths, unties restraints, makes resistance feel like a badly placed napkin. "Tell me something," she said, faking lightness while her heart thudded out of rhythm. "Do you always craft strategic settings to make women forget they have common sense?" "I prepare food," he replied, leaning in slightly as if inspecting his own creation. "The rest happens when someone decides to taste." "Convenient," she retorted, but the smile slipped out, traitorous. "Very. And you?" he asked. "Your job is hiding behind characters. But what do you do when someone reads you without the book in the way?" The question struck a raw nerve. She pretended not to feel it. Bit the bread, took her time chewing, scanned the Seine as if the answer were floating by on a tourist boat. "I changed the subject," she said at last. "Works every time. For someone who's not paying attention, maybe," he replied gently. "Not with me." She wanted to laugh to shake the tremor loose, but the laugh got stuck at her collarbone. Mathieu lifted his glass to his lips without drinking, just to lean in closer. His shadow covered hers. "What are you afraid of, Alice?" "Men with easy questions and pretty hands." "My hands are innocent," He showed his palms, laughing. They were warm, kitchen-worn hands, short, clean nails, subtle calluses from wooden spoons, tiny razor-thin cuts from steel, and 2 small burn marks smoothed over by time. They smelled of Meyer lemon and rosemary. As for the questions, they're born of appetite. Your appetite is a problem, she said, lowering her gaze to her own mouth before she could be caught looking at his. Only if you insist on pretending you're not hungry. There was something dangerous in the calm with which he said these things. It wasn't urgency. It wasn't rush. It was an invitation at the edge of a cliff. The river below caught a deeper orange glow, and the trees began casting long shadows over the grass. The city for a moment seemed suspended, as if Paris were holding its breath just to listen. "Tell me one of your stories," she asked, maybe to buy time, maybe because it was already too late to run. "One that isn't in travel guides or your recipe journal." He stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke in a tone with no pretense. "I learned to cook to fool other people's hunger. When my grandmother got sick, the house went scentless. I was a child and thought you could cook memory. The first thing I made was bad soup. Terrible. I cried in frustration. Later, I started getting the salt right, the patience, the heat. I learned that cooking is a way of promising someone, you're not going through this alone." Alice looked at him like someone recognizing something without knowing its name. The answer came almost automatic, without sarcasm. "And does it work?" "Almost always." He looked back at her. "With you, I'm still testing." She let out a quiet laugh, but her voice came softer. "I'm not an easy recipe. I don't cook easy," he said, and his hand finally brushed a loose strand of hair that the wind had stuck to the corner of her mouth. He removed it like someone pulling out a glass splinter from a fragile surface, slowly, reverently, with that firm touch that sends shivers down any living spine. "And I don't give up on dishes that make noise in the pan. I don't make noise." She tried to recover the tone, but her skin betrayed her. Goosebumps, heat, that tiny instinctive shift of her face, an unintentional inch closer. "You write in silence," he said, "and when you forget you're being watched, you murmur in another language so you can believe no one will hear." Alice's blood bloomed like a rose in her chest. It was threat and invitation. She wanted to deny it, but his crooked smile already told her that denial would only be another way of giving in. "You know what I think about men who cook like this?" she asked, throwing up one last barricade. "Tell me." She took a deep breath, glanced at his mouth, and as if she needed an invisible shield, retreated to the only trench she still believed was safe. She muttered in English, barely above a whisper, something she'd be too embarrassed to admit aloud if it weren't for the certainty he wouldn't understand. "If he touches me now, I'm not making it out, even if it rains in Paris for 7 days straight." He didn't move for a second. Then, with studied care, stepped just close enough for her to feel the breath of what was coming, but not close enough for her to say she hadn't been warned. And he answered him in English too, with a pronunciation that was both blade and silk. "Then pray it doesn't rain, darling." The shock hit her eyes first, then her whole face. Alice went silent for a moment, like someone had hit mute on the world. Her glass wavered in her fingers. Her breath of the traitor forgot how to function. "You," she began, and the phrase hung there, ridiculously short. Then she tried to recover. "You speak English?" "I do," he said simply without boasting. "I heard English before I was even born. My parents are American. Moved to Paris before I came into the world. At home we always spoke both languages. I just didn't say anything earlier, because hearing you say what you really think, believing you were safe, was far more interesting." She gripped her glass like a railing on the first step of an abyss. "And why didn't you say so?" "Because it was sweet to hear you without the mask." His smile softened, dropping the game for a rare second. "And because you deserve to find out the right way. Here, with the city watching." She brought a hand to her forehead, closed her eyes, and laughed one of those breathless laughs. Half disbelief, half indignation. "I said terrible things. You said true things." He tilted his head, his voice low, almost grateful. "And delicious." She trailed off, looking anywhere but his mouth. "You let me talk thinking no one understood me. I let you talk because it was the first time you spoke about yourself to yourself." Mathieu stepped closer, then again. until the scent of his skin took up the same space in her throat as the wine. And I promise I'll repay any embarrassment with high interest. Is that a threat? It's a commitment. The word landed in the air like a rare bird. Alice blinked, startled by the weight of what she wanted to believe. Life had been a sequence of broken promises and debts paid with indecency. There was a chance he was repeating the world's oldest trick. There was another, far more dangerous, that he was writing something new. I should be mad, she said, trying to retreat into her invisible coat. I should kick you off this blanket, out of this sunset, and out of my mind. Do it, he answered, stepping back half a pace. I'll stay here, on my side of the blanket like a good neighbor, and I'll let you decide. She took her time. The river spoke. A boat in the distance sent tourist laughter into the air. A dog shook off water on the bank and scattered drops of joy onto the grass. The world moved on. Only the two of them stayed suspended. I don't like tricks, she said at last. Or men who understand my language and pretend not to. Then let me start with no tricks. He raised his hands like someone disarming. I want you. Not because you're my neighbor. Not because you're American. Not because you moan over food. I want you because ever since you arrived, my silence no longer fits me, and I can't cook without silence. You ruined my recipe. I hate it, and I'm grateful. A laugh slipped out, short, surprised, touched, and furious all at once. Is this a confession? It's a request for risk. The wind stirred the leaves. She bit her lower lip to avoid smiling too much. The smile came anyway, crooked, small, the kind that comes right before the fall. If I say yes, do you promise not to turn my life into a pilot episode that goes nowhere? I don't do unfinished series, he said, with that calm conviction so cruel it was almost believable. I cook dishes that go back on the fire when they need to, and I stay. I stay where the flavor asks. She held her breath, then let it out slowly, like someone unlocking a secret kept far too long. I'm afraid to believe. Then don't believe. His smile gave way to tenderness. Just taste it. She didn't laugh, didn't answer with sarcasm, just nodded. Small, almost invisible. And to avoid admitting she was saying yes, she muttered again in English, now fully aware he'd understand every word. If he kisses me, I'm not responsible for what happens next. I'll sign off on that, he answered, also in English, and his voice came so close the wine on his breath struck her skin like a lit match. The first touch wasn't lips. It was his hand, very gently, holding the edge of her chin with the pads of his fingers, asking permission without a word. Alice tilted slightly as if offering her body to a dance it remembered. Then he kissed her, and it wasn't a grab. It was a build, the soft press, the gliding claim of territory, the second where breaths fell out, of sync, the pause that asks, should I continue? And the answer that comes with a mouth opening, surrendering, saying go on without sound. The world contracted to fit on that riverbank, in the forgotten wine, in the crushed fruit clinging sweetly to the corner of her lip, and he licked it as if solemnly vowing he wouldn't play fair with this. The kiss grew unhurried. There was no rush. There was hunger. There was the care of someone who knows fire and doesn't burn the pan, just heats it to the perfect point. When they pulled back, mere millimeters, Alice's eyes sparkled with a kind of grateful shock. She ran her fingers over his lips as if trying to erase her own desire, but the touch only fed the flame. He laughed, that short, almost dangerous laugh of someone who knows they've crossed a line. I said I wouldn't be responsible for what happens next. I came precisely for the next, he murmured, so close the words got trapped between their mouths. And, please don't be. Let me take responsibility for us today. She drew a deep breath as if diving, stayed there, feeling his face, the soft scrape of his unshaven beard against her skin. His large hand spread across her back in a gesture that said, I've got you, and the other hand resting on her knee, respectful, promising. The sky, at that exact moment, decided to be absurdly beautiful. Paris had a cruel streak like that. I should leave before, she began. Before what? Teased, gentle, with a smile that invited rather than pushed. Before I turn this into a chapter, she said, and they both laughed, like they'd cracked each other's secret code. He offered her another sip of wine. not to intoxicate but to punctuate. She drank, their fingers brushing again, and her skin recognized his without surprise. "You're still going to hate me for understanding every single one of your mutterings," he admitted, with an honesty that caught her off guard. "I deserve it, but I don't regret it. I'll use that against you in every future fight," she replied, finally finding the tone that neither fled nor jumped too far ahead. "And you'll placate me with indecent desserts." "Deal," he said, laughing with his eyes. "I'll bring the guilt and the syrup, and I'll bring the fear and the courage." "Perfect." He leaned back, without letting go of her hand. Half and half. They stayed like that, silent, for a time that didn't ask for clocks. Tiny cars traced lines in the distance. The water lapped against the bank with the sound of sleeping breath, and the sky decided to be every color in sequence, just to make sure no one forgot where they were. At some point, a cyclist whistled past and smiled at them like someone who recognizes a story being born. Alice rested her head on his shoulder, a small gesture, but in the secret grammar of bodies, it was a full-caps declaration, and closed her eyes. Dangerous, she thought. Necessary, corrected the part of her that was tired of surviving on half portions. In silence, he rested his chin in her hair and inhaled deeply, recording the moment like someone memorizing a rare recipe. Ingredients, temperature, time. "Don't promise me anything," she said, still with eyes closed. "Just don't treat me like someone you met by chance." "I did meet you by chance." He smiled, brushing his lips against her temple, and decided chance deserved intention. She opened. Her eyes turned her face and kissed him again. Brief this time, just to seal the sentence. She pulled the small notebook she always kept in her bag, opened it to a blank page, and wrote 2 huge words at the top, like someone titling what the body had already published, "The Two of Us." Then she closed the notebook and tucked it away without showing him. Some things deserve to grow in secret before facing the world. Mathieu, in turn, pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, scribbles of a dessert idea, and wrote at the top without thinking too hard, "American Temptation." Below, ingredients: raspberry, vanilla, lemon, and a note in the margin that would make any critic roll their eyes if they ever read it. "Serve at sunset, with courage." When they packed things up, the light was already turning blue and the street lamps, like ancient sentinels, flickered on slowly. He picked up the bag. She folded the linen cloth carefully. They walked side by side, toward the street, where the city resumed its usual soundtrack of a beautiful evening. Along the way, hands brushed, fingers reached, and neither of them had the poor judgment to pretend it was an accident. At the corner, just before hailing a ride, he pulled her gently by the waist, not to restart but to promise continuation, and asked softly, "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," she answered without drama, like someone accepting fresh bread in the morning. "Food or kiss first?" "Surprise." "Me?" He smiled, satisfied like someone pulling a perfect dish from the oven, and whispered in the secret now shared between them, "I always serve both hot." Every love story has an after. Theirs had barely begun, and it was already unforgettable. Alice walked into her apartment with a weightless body and a heart in zero gravity. The sky was still tinged pink behind the lace curtains, and the sweet scent of lavender mixed with the quiche forgotten on the neighbor's counter seemed to laugh at itself. She kicked off her shoes, tossed her bag onto the sofa with the carelessness of someone who'd just lived a scene worthy of cinematic slow motion. She didn't know if she wanted to dance through the living room or lie on the floor and laugh alone. She headed to the kitchen, still dizzy with sensation, picked up a glass, paused, considered swapping the wine for water as her small protest against the imminent emotional collapse, sat down with her phone in hand, and dialed. The number emotions always call first. "Pick up, Susan," she murmured between a sip and a disobedient smile. Her sister answered on the 3rd ring, face crumpled from still being on New York time, voice raspy from just waking up. "If you're calling at this hour, either you killed someone or you had sex." "Neither. But I nearly died and I nearly had sex. That count?" Susan's eyes widened as she sat up in bed, now 100% awake. "Alice Bernard, you've been in Paris, what? 3 weeks? And already sounding like a woman touched by the muses, touched by a dimpled Frenchman. Better than any muse." I knew it. Tell me everything. Don't make me beg. Alice settled into the couch, the camera capturing only the soft outline of her face still lit by the memory of sunset. He invited me to a picnic, in the middle of nowhere, near a lake with a view of the city. There was wine, cheese, fruit sliced like it was out of a movie, croissants lighter than my feelings, and him. Him, Susan. With that deep voice, those eyes that read you before you even open your mouth. And what else? We talked, laughed. He teased me the whole time, made double, triple entendre, set me completely on fire. That kind of man who knows exactly what he's doing, with words, with hands, and with silence. Susan sighed as if living it all by osmosis. And the kiss? Alice smiled sideways, fingers trailing across her collarbone as if touching the memory of him. The kiss was like lightning that doesn't burn, just ignites. Like everything before was rehearsal, and now was opening night. Wow. Looks like my sister fell. I don't know if I fell, but I definitely tripped. Hard. Are you going to write about him? Susan, I came here to write my book, my words, my story. And suddenly, all I want to write about is him. Susan gave that knowing smile of someone who understands it's pointless to resist certain tides. Then write it. Write everything. Even if it's not to publish, just so you don't forget. I think I couldn't forget even if I tried. Meanwhile, in another part of Paris, the city breathed music, smoke, and flashes of laughter. The bar Rue des Poètes was packed as usual, but the group at the back table, where loud voices and full glasses met weekly, seemed to sense something different tonight. Henri was the first to notice. "You're not drinking like a man with appetite, Mathieu." "I'm satisfied," he replied with a smile that blended mischief and far too much truth. Camille widened her eyes, cutting off her laughter to focus on her friend. "Satisfied? You? The man who said no woman was ever enough because your hunger came from the soul? Maybe I found a new hunger." Juliette rested her chin on her hands and smiled with mischief. "So, it's true. The American." Mathieu didn't say yes. He didn't have to. His silence carried more words than any declaration. Laureate raised his glass. "To those who mocked love and were bitten by it. Hard." Mathieu raised his too, but didn't toast. Just stared into the bottom of his glass as if seeing someone's face there. Henri didn't beat around the bush. Hooked, Dumas? No warning, no defense, no breaks. "And what's she like?" Mathieu closed his eyes for a second, like he needed to access Alice's scent in the dark. "She's chaos scented with lavender, melting irony, a walking contradiction, writes like she's carving emotion. And when she smiles, it's like the world makes a little more sense." Camille sighed theatrically. "And what are you going to do with all that?" "I'm going to cook." "Cook? It's what I do best. Tomorrow morning, croissants. And after that, whatever she lets me." The entire table went silent for a second. Not from doubt, but respect. This was new, real. Mathieu was actually in love, and for the first time, he didn't seem afraid of it. The next morning, the Parisian sky seemed to conspire with what was about to happen. Soft clouds, shy sun, the kind of morning that cradles romance and secrets with gentle hands. Mathieu woke early, earlier than usual, baked croissants with imported butter, chose raspberry jam the way someone chooses poetry, wrapped everything in a white cloth and hung the bag on Alice's doorknob, along with a tiny flower plucked from the balcony, fresh rosemary. He knocked and waited. Alice opened the door with sleepy eyes. She frowned, disbelieving. "Are you trying to seduce me first thing in the morning?" "No, I'm trying to win you over during every permitted hour." She laughed, lowered her gaze to the bag, and smelled it. Oh my God. Actually, just a Frenchman with bad intentions. And so, between croissants and confessions, the first steps of the romance not even books dared to write began to take shape, without fanfare, without announcement, just with the smell of warm bread and silent promises. The following morning, Paris seemed to lean in their favor. Clear skies, soft noises, a breeze carrying the scent of spring before its time. The doorbell rang at 8:42 a.m. Alice, still in a navy cotton robe and a loose bun balanced on her head, considered ignoring it. Too early for mail. But there was a familiar smell. Butter, sugar and cinnamon. She opened the door with the weariness of someone expecting nothing, and nearly dropped the world at her feet. Mathieu was standing there, with a paper box tied with a fabric ribbon, and a smile of well-slept mornings. "I thought you might need reinforcements," he said, as if that were normal. As if he weren't dangerously irresistible in that light sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms, and that look of a man who already knew he'd be let in. She blinked, holding on to the door frame like it was emotional support. "Do you always show up with food?" "Only when I'm investing heavily." She laughed but didn't step aside. Mathieu lifted the box like a knight offering both a gift and a challenge at once. "Croissants," he said, almost whispering, as if revealing a secret weapon. "Freshly baked, with secret fillings. One has Belgian chocolate. The other, well, you'll have to find out." Alice opened the door a little wider. "Just a bit. And what if I don't want to share breakfast with a stubborn Frenchman?" "I'm not stubborn. I'm persistent. Stubborn is the one who thinks she'll resist." She arched a brow. He walked in. In the small kitchen, the sun slipped through the window like a conspirator. The table had 2 chairs, and Alice couldn't remember the last time anyone had shared the silence of her mornings. Mathieu opened the box with reverence, as if before an altar. The scent of croissants filled the room with the kind of promise one should never make on an empty stomach. "Which one do you want?" he asked, showing the options. "Chocolate or surprise?" She pulled the surprise, bit into it, cautiously. "Goat cheese?" she guessed. "And black truffles?" Alice closed her eyes, and bit again. "This is indecent." That was the plan. She chewed slowly, eyes half closed, and Mathieu watched her like she was the most intriguing painting in all the Louvre. He didn't say anything for a while, just listened to the sound of her bites, the soft scrape of the coffee mug across the table, and the faint sigh she let out after each mouthful. "I came to win you over," he said at last, with the brutal simplicity of someone speaking truth. She stopped. "With croissants? With everything I can. With breakfasts, books left on your doorstep on purpose, music played at the exact moment, teasing that makes your face flush." He leaned in slightly. "And silences. I like the way you're quiet, Alice. Almost as much as I like the way you try to hide that you're feeling something." She wiped her lips with the napkin, as if trying to hide her vulnerability along with the crumbs. "And if I say I'm not ready, then I'll say I didn't come to demand anything, just to offer. And if I don't want anything from anyone, then tell me. But until you say it while looking me in the eyes, I'll keep coming." Alice looked at him, without armor, without defense. "You're too confident." "No. I just know how to recognize what's rare when I find it." Silence settled, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of unspoken pact between 2 people who know what's coming, even without naming it. Alice stood to get more coffee. The navy cotton robe traced her legs subtly, and the messy bun at the top of her head gave her the look of a woman who'd just woken up, beautiful without trying. Mathieu watched her with the silent devotion of someone who knows certain images are worth collecting. The way the morning light stretched across her shoulders, as if the city itself conspired to make that scene unforgettable, made Paris feel even more romantic. "Alice," he called, his voice low, dense, almost a touch. She turned, keeping the coffee pot in her hand. "Yes? Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" She raised an eyebrow. The corner of her mouth curved, but her tone came sharp. "If this is about the coffee, I can make it better. If it's about something else, then I take no responsibility. It's exactly about the other thing." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed with a curious expression. The robe fell open, slightly at the neckline, revealing just enough to make the morning feel forbidden. "And what exactly did I do?" "You showed up," with that sweetly sarcastic voice, that way of looking like you're mentally writing my biography. He stood, moved closer but kept a safe distance. "For now. And now. Now you're standing in front of me with coffee in that robe and you expect me to keep pretending I'm not completely hypnotized?" She laughed, but there was something different in the laugh. A tremor in her lips, a flicker in her eyes. "I wasn't expecting any of this, you. Neither was I. And yet here we are." He took a step, close enough now to hear each other's breathing. "Mathieu," she began, but her voice faltered. "I don't want rush, but I don't want distance either. She looked at him, directly, without walls. "And what is it you want?" "I want to be the reason for your next chapter. I want that when you write about Paris. You know that among all the clichés, there was something that was only yours." Alice felt her heart beating against her lips. She swallowed hard and whispered, "And if I lose myself in this, then I'll find you." He leaned in, and his voice almost brushed her skin. "With a kiss, coffee, and maybe a chocolate croissant." She smiled, even while trying to contain it. "You're dangerous." "No, I'm the best part of your day. You just haven't realized it yet." And then, the kiss almost came, but she pulled back, half a step, still smiling, her whole body on alert. "Coffee?" she offered, changing the subject like someone throwing an anchor into the sea. "Always, as long as it's with you." She served. He drank slowly, and even without touch, without mouths meeting, the air was heavy with promises. When he left, there was no ordinary goodbye, just a lingering look and a phrase whispered with that French accent that made everything more dangerous. "Tonight, 7 o'clock. If you want to come, I'll be there. If you don't want to, I'll be there too." She stood still, cup in her hands, and her heart, definitely, no longer knew which way to beat. Night arrived like a whisper between curtains. Paris lit its lamps one by one, as if also preparing for a date. The sky was a deep blue brushed with copper at the horizon, and as punctual as the desire that had been growing between them. Mathieu was at her door at 7. He didn't ring the bell, just waited, and she opened. Alice wore a light dress loose on her body, with thin straps that looked ready to slip off her shoulders with any bolder movement. Her hair was tied in a careless bun, with strands falling loose, a kind of visual provocation he understood as invitation. "You came," she said softly, as if still surprised at her own courage. "And you look beautiful, but I think you already knew that." She smiled, shook her head no, but didn't deny it. She just picked up her small purse and said, "Then let's go. I want to see this secret with a view." He led her through narrow streets, charming alleys, shortcuts only someone in love with Paris would know. They climbed a staircase of old stones, crossed a silent garden, and at last arrived at a hidden terrace among rooftops. The view was breathtaking. The Eiffel Tower in the distance, lights reflecting in the Seine, the golden dome of Les Invalides shining like a promise. In the center of the terrace, a blanket was spread, pillows, a bottle of wine already open, and a small wooden box with a covered dish. "Mathieu," she began, "this is too French?" He laughed. "Too poetic. Your fault. You make me want to write verses, and I don't even like poetry." She sat down carefully, observing every detail like someone trying to save the moment in HD in her memory. He sat beside her and opened the box. Pork loin with a mustard and honey crust, confit potatoes, grilled asparagus, and fig tart for dessert. He pointed to the cutlery, and no innocent intentions. She lifted her wine glass and said before drinking, "To premeditated crime, to the perfect accomplice." They toasted, ate, laughed, talked about everything and about nothing. He told her about the first time he burned a soufflé and cried out of anger. She told him about the worst book she ever wrote, and how she almost gave up on literature because of it. The conversation was good, but the tension was better. At some point, he leaned closer, brushed a crumb from the corner of her mouth with his thumb and said, "Do you have any idea how much you distract me? Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's a desperate attempt to keep my composure." She laughed, and her eyes sparkled. Then she looked away, as if trying to run from something that was already happening. Her laughter faded slowly, until it became only breath, and then silence. The kind of silence that seems to carry an entire destiny. Mathieu just looked at her, said nothing, just touched her chin with the tips of his fingers and slid down to her neck, as if memorizing the path before asking permission to get lost. Alice didn't pull away. She only looked back at him, like someone who knows they're standing at the edge of something that changes everything. He drew his lips closer, slowly, as if time had slowed just to watch them happen. And when the kiss came, it was as if all of Paris held its breath. It was hunger, but also calm. It was discovery and reunion at the same time. A kiss that tasted of midnight and promise. A kiss that said, "I don't want another life, just this one." just you. His hands found hers, then her arms, her back, her warmth, and when he laid her down on the pillows, he did it carefully, as if she were a story too rare to be read in a hurry. There, on that terrace hidden among rooftops, Alice gave herself as if she already belonged, as if time had been waiting for that very instant to truly begin. The night was a continuous whisper, a rhythm of bodies and desires, stifled laughter, closed eyes, fingers that knew exactly where to touch. He explored her with devotion. She answered with surrender. There was no rush, no hesitation, only desire and tenderness, and the feeling that nothing outside of that mattered anymore. When the sky began to lighten and the first shades of blue announced a new day, Mathieu kissed her shoulder with reverence. Alice nestled against his chest, stripped of fear and wrapped in desire, and thought, for the first time in a long while, that maybe love wasn't a fantasy. Maybe it was Paris, and a man who smelled of warm bread, and hands that knew the exact measure between hunger and care. The night came to an end, but love at last had begun. Paris didn't change Alice, love did, and she let everything that once hurt turn into prose. It was autumn once again. The golden leaves brushed along the boulevards like the distracted strokes of a lovesick artist. Paris breathed in slow sighs and afternoons that grew chilly too soon, as if inviting couples to draw closer together at cafes with little tables pressed side by side. And Alice no longer walked alone. The apartment on the third floor now carried a constant scent of cinnamon, coffee, and fresh books. The old typewriter inherited from her grandfather shared space with a pile of stale croissants and drafts covered in red ink, cuts, notes, laughter. Some passages bore a man's handwriting at the bottom, and an unmistakable signature. This part needs more truth, and maybe less shirt. Monsieur Alice, now a published author, looked at her own name in the bookstore window on Rue Saint-Honoré, as if she were a character in her own story. And she was. The cover read, "A romance even books didn't dare to write by Alice Bernard." The dedication? "For the man who taught me to stop writing escapes and start living happy endings." Not that hers had ended. On the contrary, the story was only beginning to repeat itself, in breakfasts with burnt toast, in arguments over playlists, and in comfortable silences shared on the terrace beneath the stars. And it had all begun with a stumble, a pie, and a Frenchman with dangerous vices, dimples, croissants, and the courage to listen beyond words. Now Mathieu walked into the apartment carrying a box of freshly delivered copies from the publisher. He wore reading glasses and a scandalously snug sweater. "Ready to sign the pile of fans who are going to want to know who's the man behind the M?" he teased, setting the box on the table. Alice smiled. "I'll say he's a fictional character." "You'd be that cruel?" "Depends. Are you making coffee today or just posing as the handsome one?" "What if I do both?" She laughed and brushed past him, deliberately grazing her hip against his waist. She still enjoyed watching Mathieu lose his train of thought over one carefully accidental touch. "The critics are going wild," he remarked, pouring the grounds into the coffee maker. "Did you read the piece in Le Monde?" "I did. 3 times. But it still feels surreal that they're comparing my book to Nora Ephron." "Nora's proud wherever she is, and probably jealous, because you dared to write what even she might have hesitated to." Alice came up behind him, slid her arms beneath his, and hugged his torso like someone holding on to home, faith, and future all at once. "You gave me courage, Mathieu. You already had it. I just made sure you remembered." The smell of coffee rose, warm and strong. They stayed there, wrapped in each other, as if nothing else needed to happen that day, and maybe nothing did. That night Mathieu's bistro was fuller than usual. After the success of Alice's book, which discreetly mentioned the kitchen that seduces, the curious and the romantics had turned into loyal patrons. Henri appeared with a newspaper under his arm and a flower tucked in his pocket. "Guess who's in every culture column this week? The most unlikely and most captivating couple in Paris." Camille, with a crooked smile, raised her glass of champagne. "To the love that feeds the stomach and the soul." Lauriette and Juliette debated over which passages in the book had been inspired by which real encounters. Each had their own theory. Mathieu only smiled, wiping down the counter like someone who listens but confirms nothing. He knew. Alice knew, and that was enough. Back at the apartment, hours later, Alice sat on the terrace wrapped in a checkered coat, her bare feet resting on the wooden ledge. The laptop lay across her legs, but she wasn't typing, just observing the city, the moon, and her own heart, which now seemed to beat to a rhythm that fit inside life. Mathieu arrived with 2 cups, one of tea, one of coffee. "I couldn't decide," he said, offering both. "So I brought both options. You've always been good with dualities. I'm French. Our entire language is built of words with more than one meaning." She took the coffee, he, the tea. "Thinking about the next book?" "Maybe," she answered, taking a sip. "Or maybe just thinking how all of this would have been if I hadn't taken that apartment. Fate loves to hide in rental contracts. And in bags with pie." They laughed. The wind blew stronger. She drew closer. He slipped an arm around her with ease. "I love you, Alice Bernard," he said, as if it were no news at all. She looked at him. "You say it as if you were certain. I say it as someone who wakes up every day and chooses to love, even when you ignore me, or eat the last piece of pie. That's serious. Deadly serious, and still He pulled her tighter. "I choose." She closed her eyes, rested her head on his shoulder. "Me too. You also eat the last piece? I also choose to love you, every day. And if I ever write another book, it will start like this. Once upon a time, there was a man who cooked as if he were proposing marriage." Mathieu laughed. "Then I'll have to improve my recipes." "You don't need to. I know. But making you moan with a piece of quiche is still my favorite sport." She poked his ribs, smiling sideways. Arrogant. He slid his fingers along her waist, slowly. "Deliciously yours." The sky filled with stars. They stayed in silence, but it was that good silence, the kind that comes after everything has been said, when all the cards are on the table and the game is finally won. Alice looked out at Paris, which now felt more like home than scenery. She felt whole, writing from a place of peace, of presence, of love, and love. Love was more than pages. It was the smell of puff pastry in the mornings, fingers intertwined while crossing the street, and that gaze that said, "I'm with you, even on the days you doubt it." She smiled to herself. Because of all the stories she had ever read, written, or lived, none had been as deliciously impossible as the one she was living now. But she dared to write, and she had the luck and the courage to live it. Some stories don't end. They simply change tense. Months later, life carried on with the kind of natural ease only great loves can live. Alice and Mathieu kept their rituals, improvised breakfasts with day-old bread and salted butter, afternoons of writing interrupted by curious fingers, and dinners with friends who had become family. He had expanded the bistro. Now there was a second location in Montmartre. The clientele remained faithful, but the menu had gained subtler, almost literary touches. Some dishes were named after passages from Alice's book, like the first kiss at dusk, a quiche with basil fragrance and creamy cheese. She, in turn, was already writing her second book, but without hurry. The story needed to grow in the heart first before being born on the page. And this time, there were no more escapes. There was Paris. There was him. There was home. On a random Sunday, Alice woke before him, walked barefoot to the kitchen, made the coffee, warmed 2 croissants, picked up a pencil and scribbled something on a napkin. When Mathieu appeared, rumpled from sleep and sexy in the way only he knew how to be, she slid the napkin toward him with a mischievous smile. He read, "I fell in love with you in chapters, but I love you in whole pages." He looked at her, said nothing, simply pulled her by the waist, pressed his forehead against hers, and said, "You'll never have to write escapes again, and you'll never have to cook to protect yourself." It wasn't protection, it was seduction. She laughed. It worked. It gave us Paris, and they kissed with the serenity of those who know that it's no longer about destiny or luck or timing. It was love, the kind even books didn't dare to write, but they lived. Some stories are so real they don't need fiction. Others are so improbable they can only be born from love. And sometimes, When the universe is inspired, it writes both on the same page. This story was made for anyone who once swore they'd never fall in love again, and still secretly dreams of being swept away. Tell me in the comments, do you believe in a love that starts with a glance and ends up as a novel? If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who also deserves a love no book ever dared to write. Your interaction helps this channel grow and keeps us inspired to bring you more intense, passionate stories with that touch of humor we all adore.